It all started in 2014. Emily was 27 and I was 26. We had been together for 5 years, married for 2. We met in college. She was studying accounting and I was studying mechanical engineering. Our first meeting was at a party thrown by a mutual friend. From the moment we started talking, it felt easy, like we had known each other forever. After a few dates, we made it official. 1 year later, we were married. Emily had an older sister, Rachel, who was married to Michael, a good friend of hers. But the real challenge in our relationship? Her mother, Margaret. Margaret never accepted me. From the very beginning, she did everything in her power to create a wedge between us. She'd say things like, "Emily deserves better," or "You're not good enough for her," every chance she got. It was humiliating. It wore me down, but I told myself it didn't matter. Emily was everything to me. Brilliant, stunning, and the kind of woman that turned heads without even trying. I had a solid career as a mechanical engineer, and we were in a good place. We agreed not to have children right away, wanting to travel and finish paying off the house first. Emily was completely on board. She even started talking about going for her master's degree, something I fully supported and offered to pay for. I just wanted her to feel secure. But a year after we got married, everything changed. Margaret had a fall. It wasn't serious, but she was hospitalized for a few days. The doctors recommended bed rest, and Emily was beside herself with worry. She stayed with her mother during her recovery, and I understood. Family was important. Still, I missed her. Then came the anniversary party. Emily's parents were celebrating 30 years of marriage, and the whole family gathered to celebrate. But what should have been a happy evening quickly turned into something else entirely. 2 announcements were made that night, both of them shocking. First, Rachel, who had been trying for years to conceive, shared her devastating news. She couldn't have children. She had gone through countless fertility treatments, seen specialists, and exhausted every option. It had all led to nothing. The pain in her voice, the heartbreak in her eyes. I could feel it. Then came Margaret's turn to speak. I had always known she was emotionally distant, but that night, she let down her guard. With tears in her eyes, she told us how desperately she longed to become a grandmother. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her words carrying a weight that settled over the entire room. "A fall could be the end of me," she said, her eyes darting toward Emily. "I just want to live long enough to see my daughter have children." I turned to Emily, immediately sensing something was wrong. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she reached for her wine glass. But it wasn't helping. Her mother's words had struck a deep chord. That night, when we got home, Emily was distant. She barely spoke, lost in thought. I gave her space, but after a while, I couldn't hold back. "Emily," I said softly, sitting beside her on the couch, "are you okay?" She looked up at me, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. "I don't know, Jake," she whispered. I just don't know." I reached for her hand. "Is this about your mom?" She nodded, her voice breaking. "She's right, though. She's not going to be around forever. And Rachel?" She trailed off, shaking her head. "She's suffering, Jake. I don't know what to do." I pulled her into a hug, pressing my lips to the top of her head. "We don't have to decide anything right now," I assured her. "We'll figure it out together." But even as I said the words, I knew something had shifted. Margaret's desperate plea had unsettled her, and I could feel it weighing on her. I should have confronted it then. I should have talked to her about it, but I didn't. And that was a mistake. The weeks passed, then months. Nothing seemed different, at least not on the surface. Then one afternoon, everything imploded. I was at work when my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was shaking. "Jake, I'm at the hospital," she said, barely holding it together. "It's Rachel. She tried to hurt herself." I froze. A knot of cold fear twisted in my stomach. "Are you okay?" I managed to ask, though it sounded ridiculous. "I'm fine," she replied quickly. "But she's in critical condition, Jake. I need you here." I didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," I said, trying to steady my voice. But I was terrified. Racing to the hospital, my mind spun, trying to piece together how this had happened. When I arrived, I found Emily in the waiting room, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She didn't even speak, just collapsed into my arms the second she saw me. Across the room, Margaret stood stiffly, her face unreadable. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even comforting Emily. She just stood there, watching us. When her eyes met mine, they were cold, accusatory, like this was my fault. Rachel's husband, Michael, was sitting nearby, his face buried in his hands. Next to him, Margaret's husband and Marco, Rachel's closest friend, stood in silence. The room was heavy with tension, but it was Margaret's stare that unsettled me the most. Like she already knew what had happened, and like she had already decided who was to blame. It felt like the blame was on me, though I couldn't understand why. What happened? I asked, my voice low, trying to make sense of it all. Emily's voice trembled. It's the infertility, Jake. Rachel, she's been struggling with it for years. But after Mom's comments about wanting grandchildren, it broke her. The pressure was too much, and she couldn't handle it. A sickening pang hit my chest. I couldn't begin to imagine what Rachel was going through, but I did understand how deeply it must have hurt her. 2 days later, she was discharged from the hospital, still shaken, but physically okay. The doctors prescribed her antidepressants to help her cope with the aftermath, and the whole family gathered at Margaret's house to discuss what had happened. It was tense. The air felt thick, suffocating with unspoken words and sharp glances. As we sat in the living room, the topic of grandchildren resurfaced. Rachel's infertility was still fresh in everyone's mind, and Margaret's desperate plea at the anniversary party lingered like a ghost in the room. I hesitated, knowing what I was about to say might be controversial, but I pushed forward anyway. What if you and Michael consider adoption? I suggested, keeping my voice steady. It could be a way to have a child in your life, even if it's not biological. Adoption is real, and it could bring a lot of joy. Silence. The air shifted, heavy and cold. All eyes were on me. Margaret's expression turned sharp, as if I had just suggested something disgusting. Adopt a child, she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. Her face twisted in disapproval, and she let out a harsh breath. That's not the same as having a grandchild of our own blood, she spat. A child from our family. A real grandchild. Her words hit like a slap, and I forced myself to keep my frustration in check. I wasn't suggesting this to undermine anyone. I was suggesting it because I knew how much Rachel and Michael longed for a family. But Margaret wasn't hearing any of it. After that, the conversation died. No more suggestions. No more discussion. Just silence, thick and suffocating. We left shortly after. Emily didn't say much, but I could tell from the way she clenched her hands in her lap that she was just as frustrated as I was. In the following weeks, something changed. Rachel and Michael started coming over more often, spending longer hours at our house. But their visits felt different. They would whisper in the kitchen, their hushed conversations barely audible. But the second I entered the room, they fell silent. Something about their behavior felt off, like they were hiding something from me. But I didn't press it. I told myself maybe Rachel was just going through a hard time. Maybe she needed Emily. Then Emily started changing. She became more guarded with her phone, angling the screen away when I walked into the room. She was distant. When I reached for her at night, she pulled away. Our intimacy, something that had always been strong, began fading. A disconnect grew between us, and I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out why. Then came July 5th, a day I would never forget. I turned onto our street and immediately felt my stomach drop. Several cars were parked outside the house. Something was wrong. I rushed inside. The moment I stepped through the door, I found them. The whole family. Margaret, Rachel and Michael, Emily, all of them sitting in the living room, their expressions grim. Emily was the first to speak. Sit down. We need to talk. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. I glanced around, searching for some kind of clue. What's going on? I asked cautiously, but before Emily could answer, Margaret cut in. Her voice was sharp. What solution can you give us? I blinked. Solution? What are you talking about? Margaret's eyes narrowed, then flicked to Emily before she spoke again. Your grandchildren, she said coldly. A wave of confusion and frustration hit me all at once. I I don't understand. The air was thick, suffocating. Desperately, I tried to come up with something, anything. Maybe we should look into in vitro fertilization? I suggested hesitantly. I know it's not a guarantee, but it could help. Margaret's reaction was immediate. Her face twisted in disgust. Her age-old judgment was written all over her features, as clear as ever. She shook her head. No, 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 she muttered to herself, almost like she was trying to dismiss the idea before it could take root. Then she looked up, and her eyes were gleaming, with resolution, with something dark. I have another solution, she said simply. My pulse spiked. I turned to Emily for reassurance, for some kind of clue as to what was coming next, but she wouldn't look at me. Instead, her gaze shifted to Rachel, and then back to her mother. Something wasn't right. I turned to Rachel. She was smiling, and beside her, Michael sat, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin, his posture dripping with arrogance. The tension in the room tightened like a noose. I had no idea what was coming next, but whatever it wasn't good. Emily sat there, silent, her face unreadable. Then, suddenly, she snapped. Idiot! Say something. Her words hit like a slap, and I flinched, caught off guard by the sudden rage in her voice. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out, because I still didn't understand. I didn't see it yet, but I was about to, and once I did, there would be no going back. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Then Margaret, with a calmness that made my blood run cold, spoke again. As you know, dear, she began, addressing Emily directly, Rachel has been cursed with the inability to give us grandchildren. The joy of motherhood, something she will never experience. Her voice dripped with judgment, each word carrying a weight I didn't fully understand yet. Emily's posture stiffened, and she cut her mother off sharply. We've looked into other options, she said, her tone tight with something I couldn't quite place. But surrogacy, it's risky. There are too many genetic and hereditary issues that could arise in future generations. She shook her head, looking drained, as if this wasn't the first time she'd had this argument. Michael, never one to stay quiet for long, chimed in. Surrogacy is expensive, he said flatly. We can't afford it. Not with all the other costs a child brings. I was struggling to keep up, my mind racing to piece together where this conversation was headed. And then I asked the worst question I could have. So what exactly are you proposing? That's when Margaret's words struck like a thunderclap. Since you refuse to have children, she said smoothly, Emily will become pregnant with Michael. The world stopped. The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel, cutting through my mind like a blade. My heart slammed painfully against my ribs. Pregnant. With Michael. My wife. With my brother-in-law. I turned to Emily, desperately searching for an explanation, but she wouldn't look at me. She kept her eyes trained on the floor, her silence heavier than the words themselves. I felt sick. I hoped this was some kind of sick joke, but one look at Margaret's unwavering expression told me it wasn't. She continued speaking, her voice as composed as ever, as if she was simply explaining the weather. We understand that you don't want to raise the child, she said coldly. Don't worry, once the baby is born, it will be registered under Rachel and Michael's name. I could feel the blood draining from my face. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Margaret wasn't done. Children are not products, she continued, her voice thick with self-righteousness. They are not made in a laboratory. They must be conceived with love, as the fruit of a couple. In other words, through coitus. The words sent a wave of disgust crashing over me. She was actually justifying this. She was actually trying to frame this as something righteous. She even started pulling religious arguments into it, claiming that the church forbade artificial conception and that any child born outside of natural means would be condemned to hell. I couldn't take it anymore. Before she could spew another word, I stood up abruptly, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. No way. I never raised my voice like that, but I couldn't hold it in. I needed them to understand. Emily, I turned to her, my voice raw with frustration. What do you have to say about this? She looked at me then. Finally, her expression flickering between fear and uncertainty. But she didn't speak. She didn't defend me. She didn't say anything. And that hit harder than anything else. She wasn't on my side. Margaret stared at me, taken aback by my outburst. But instead of backing down, she pressed forward, her tone patronizing. Michael, who had been quiet until now, suddenly stepped toward me, reaching out as if to comfort me. I snapped. "Don't touch me," I barked, stepping back, my anger boiling over. Margaret sighed dramatically, her tone turning almost sympathetic. "Look," she said smoothly, "we respect your choice not to have children." Then she added, her voice dripping with condescension, "But I also understand that you are still young, and you have the urge to explore. Therefore, Michael will be the one to take care of it." I froze. My mind reeled, unable to process the words coming out of her mouth. "What?" She didn't hesitate. "Rachel agrees that her son should be conceived in an act of love. Therefore, it will be between Emily and Michael." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The words were impossible. And that's when I snapped. "You're crazy, you old witch." The words ripped out of me, raw and full of rage. The room went silent. Completely, terrifyingly silent. Rachel gasped. Emily's face twisted, not just in anger, but in something else. Regret? Guilt? I couldn't tell. Michael, who had remained smugly silent, smirked. "Come on," he said lazily, his voice dripping with amusement. "It'll be fun." And that was it. I don't even remember moving. 1 second, I was standing there. The next, my fist was slamming into his face. Michael hit the ground hard, his smirk wiped clean. The room erupted into chaos. Rachel screamed. Emily shouted. Their voices blurred together, but I didn't care. I could barely hear them over the rage pounding through me. "Get out of my house," I roared, my voice shaking with fury. I didn't wait for them to respond. I stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me, locking it. Through the window, I saw them leaving. Rachel guiding a stumbling Michael, Margaret's expression tight with fury. Then, the door burst open. Emily stormed in, her face flushed with anger. But beneath it, I saw something else. "Hurt? You offended my mother," she shouted, her voice shaking. That was what she was upset about? Not the fact that they had just tried to convince me to let her have a baby with Michael. She didn't care about that. I clenched my jaw, the rage boiling over. "You're ignoring the fact that they're trying to manipulate me into letting you sleep with your brother-in-law." The words hung between us, thick with betrayal. And for the first time, Emily's expression broke. Because she knew. She knew exactly what she had done. And so did I. I shot back, my voice raw from shouting. Emily didn't respond. She just glared at me, her eyes full of rage and resentment. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. That night, after spending the entire afternoon with my best friend, Ethan, I finally went home. Ethan had been my rock, the only one who truly listened, offering words of support when I felt like I was drowning. "This is manipulation, Jake. Your mother-in-law is behind all of this," he said, shaking his head. I nodded, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me again. Ethan was right. Margaret was at the center of this madness. Then Ethan suggested something that, at first, sounded crazy. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. "Maybe it's time to leave the city, Jake. Take Emily. Get away from all of this. The less you're around her family, the less their influence on her, and on you." I had been thinking about it for days, trying to figure out how to make everything stop hurting. It wasn't a bad idea, but was I ready to run away from my problems? I didn't know. But the thought of being away from her family, away from all the pressure, the manipulation, it sounded like something I needed, even if I didn't want to admit it. When I got home that evening, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, her face red and blotchy. She had been crying. I stopped in my tracks, guilt twisted in my gut, but I didn't know what to say. "Emily?" My voice came out softer than I intended. She looked up, her eyes filled with fresh tears. "My mom's been hospitalized," she said, her voice trembling. "She's in critical condition." I didn't even think before responding. "That old witch can die for all I care." The words just spilled out, bitter and cold. I saw the way her face crumbled, saw how much I had hurt her, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I had bottled everything up for so long that it erupted. It wasn't my proudest moment. Emily collapsed into herself, sobbing, her entire body shaking. I watched her, my heart sinking, but I didn't say anything. Then, finally, I spoke, my voice quiet, but sharp. It wasn't my intention to hurt you, I admitted, but your mother? She's given me zero reason to respect her. She wiped her tears away, sniffling. You don't understand, Jake, she whispered. Rachel, she's still so depressed. I'm afraid she'll try to hurt herself again. Rachel's mental health was spiraling. I knew it. I just didn't know how to fix it. I was silent for a moment. Then I said something I never thought I would say. Fine, we'll try. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. We'll try for a baby. Our baby. Yours and mine. I hated saying it, but I knew I had no other choice. Emily's face lit up, a soft smile breaking through the sadness. It's okay, she whispered. We'll try soon. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about us. This was about keeping her family happy. And that didn't sit right with me. Days passed without incident, but something about Emily had shifted. She was softer, more affectionate. She no longer hid her phone from me. She would smile at me randomly, and for the first time in months, it felt like I was falling in love with her again. But there was still something off. Something I couldn't put my finger on. 6 months passed, and somehow, I found myself deeper in our marriage than ever. I didn't even know how it happened, but I was more in love with Emily than I had ever been. If she wanted something, I gave it to her. A new TV? I bought it. A spa day? Booked. I didn't question it. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the desire to make up for everything. Either way, Emily's happiness became my priority. Margaret had stopped pushing for grandchildren. Rachel seemed to be improving. For the first time, the pressure had lifted. And then, I had a surprise planned for Emily. Something I had been saving up for. Something to show her how much I cared. On February 20th, I walked through the door, my hands gripping the tickets tightly. But the moment I stepped inside, something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. At first, I thought Emily had just stepped out. But as I made my way upstairs, the feeling of dread deepened. Then I saw it. A note, sitting on our bed. My heart sank as I picked it up, recognizing Emily's handwriting. Jake, I see that nothing in our relationship has changed. I love you more than ever, and I know you love me too. My mother has become more affectionate with you. She appreciates you in her own way. However, Rachel cannot be happy. The guilt of not giving her a grandchild is destroying her. I hadn't told you before, but I know you'll understand. You've changed a lot these past few months. You're mature now. You love me too much. My parents, Rachel and Michael, are doing what we planned 6 months ago. Today, we are leaving town. I will get pregnant by Michael. I will not tell you where we are, because I know you. And I know you shouldn't be in a stressful situation. Neither should Michael. Rachel told me that he gets nervous, and maybe we can't conceive on the first try. That's why we'll be gone for a month. Don't bother looking for us. I will return when I am pregnant. This does not change our relationship. We will pretend like nothing happened. No one in the family knows, and that's how it will stay. Just between us. I stood there, frozen, unable to process what I had just read. The words sunk in slowly, spreading through my chest like a sickness. I felt humiliated, betrayed. More than anything, I felt completely alone. And in that moment, I realized something I should have known all along. There was no trust in this marriage, no mutual respect. Everything had been orchestrated for the sake of her mother's demands. I was furious, but more than anything, I was ashamed of myself. Emily had walked all over me, and Margaret had been pulling the strings from the shadows, as always. I had been so naive, believing this was real, believing Emily truly loved me. Eventually, my sadness turned into something else. Indifference. 2 days later, something inside me clicked. I finally saw it for what it was. Manipulation on a level I had never imagined. Emily and Margaret had twisted things so masterfully that I had been left completely blind. They made me into the obedient husband, the forgiving fool who excused everything. and I hated myself for letting it happen. But not anymore. I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't going to stay silent. I got in my car and drove to Margaret's house, my mind racing. I wanted answers, even if I didn't know what the hell I was going to say when I got there. But when I pulled up, their cars were gone. Just like Emily's note had said, they were already gone. My humiliation deepened. They had planned this so carefully, so secretly, and I had been left behind like I was nothing. I clenched my jaw, feeling sick to my stomach. I went back home, furious, my mind still spinning. Then, I picked up my phone and called Ethan. He answered after a few rings, his voice heavy with concern. "Jake? What happened, man? You okay?" I took a deep breath. "No, I'm not okay." There was no sugarcoating it. Emily's gone. They took off like we were never even married. She's going to get pregnant by Michael and I stopped myself. What was the point of saying it? I already sounded pathetic. Ethan sighed, long and heavy. "Jake, that's messed up. That's a hell of a betrayal. What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer for him. I felt lost. "I don't know, Ethan. I honestly don't know." We cracked open a few beers, sitting there in silence, letting the weight of it sink in. Then, after a few more drinks, he asked again, "For real, man? What are you going to do?" I didn't even look at him. My eyes stayed glued to the table, the bottle of beer in my hand now warm. "Nothing," I said flatly. "I'm not doing anything. I don't even want to look for her. I just want this to be over." Later that night, I tried calling Emily, but then I saw it. She had left her phone behind. I wasn't surprised. She had done it on purpose. Another way to keep me from reaching her. Another way to make sure I couldn't get answers. I picked it up, my fingers tightening around it. Then I checked her messages. Everything seemed normal. Conversations with her family. Updates on Margaret's condition. It was all so damn fake. That weekend, I stewed in my anger. I did nothing but sit there, letting the betrayal rot inside me, poisoning everything. The manipulation, the lies, the absolute disrespect. It only solidified one thing. I hated Emily. I hated her family. I couldn't believe what I had let happen. She had been cheating on me with her brother-in-law for months. And that whole excuse about him being too nervous to conceive? A joke. They had been planning this from the start. And I was done. It was time to get out. To disappear from their toxic mess. I made a plan. Bought tickets to Canada. Packed everything I needed. Sold my car. The house was leased. It was paid for the next 6 months, so I didn't care. I sold all the important electronics for cash. I emptied our joint accounts. She wasn't getting a single penny. I canceled the cards. Changed the insurance policies. I cut Emily out completely. I had enough saved to survive for a few months, long enough to figure things out. I even asked Ethan for a loan. He didn't hesitate. "Whatever you need, man," he said. "Just keep me in the loop." I knew I could count on him. I took Emily's phone with me. Before I left, I quit my job. Made it clear to everyone I was gone. And I didn't want to hear from anyone. Not even her. Not ever. 3 weeks into my new life in Canada, I was finally starting to breathe again. Then, one morning, a WhatsApp notification popped up on Emily's phone. It was from a family group chat. Title, "Baby." My heart pounded. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the message, and what I saw made my stomach drop. "It's finally happened, family. After more than 20 attempts, we will finally have a grandchild." I clicked on the attached photo, and my world collapsed. It was Rachel's message. Arnold was standing beside Emily, grinning, looking so damn proud. Emily was lying in a hospital bed, wearing nothing but her underwear. She looked exhausted, and I could tell they had just been intimate. The next image was a pregnancy test. Positive. Emily was pregnant by Michael. I felt like my chest had been crushed, like my soul had been ripped out of my body. The messages kept coming in. "Congratulations. Rachel, we finally did it." Michael, and Emily, my wife, was in the middle of it all, smiling, happy, living a life I didn't even recognize. I tried to push it out of my mind. I started job hunting in Canada, desperate for a distraction. Luckily, my engineering skills and language background helped. I landed a job at a factory, a far cry from my old career, but it was something. At least I wasn't surrounded by the lies of my past life. A week into my new job, I woke up on a Sunday morning. There was a new message on Emily's phone. From her. Love, I'm home. Everything went well. I'm pregnant. Come soon. I stared at the message, my mind blank. She was acting like nothing happened. Like I was supposed to just come back. Like I was supposed to pretend it never happened. And that's when I knew. She had never loved me at all. I have something to tell you. I stared at the message for a long time. The audacity. After everything, she still thought I would come running back to her? I didn't respond. I spent the day wandering around Toronto, trying to clear my mind. I wanted nothing to do with her or the mess she had left behind. But the messages kept coming. Darling, come home. We need to talk about this. Also, the accounts are empty and the cards don't work. I need money for groceries. I scoffed. Her brother-in-law and that old witch could take care of her. She wasn't my problem anymore. I kept walking, but Emily's persistence was like a thorn in my side. Then the call started. Her name flashed on my screen. Then Rachel's. Then Michael's. I rejected every single one. They didn't stop. All afternoon, my phone buzzed with notifications. Pleading, begging, desperate attempts to get me to listen. I didn't care. Then my father called. I wasn't expecting it. His voice on the other end caught me off guard. Jake, he said, his tone cautious. We need to talk. Your mother's worried about you. Why are you doing this? Why are you ignoring Emily? I hadn't spoken to him in weeks. Dad, just stay out of it. I can't do this anymore. I'm done with all of them. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Jake, this is a family matter. Don't make any rash decisions. You need to come home. Home. The home they destroyed? I didn't want to go back. But my father, always the voice of reason, kept pushing. Son, think about what you're doing. Your mother wants to help you through this. We can fix things. Fix what, exactly? Emily made her choice. And so had I. I ended the call. But I knew the message was clear. Even my father was trying to pull me back in. 2 days later, he called again. This time, I told him everything. The betrayal. The note Emily left me. The WhatsApp messages. At first, he was silent. Then, when he spoke again, he sounded almost in disbelief. You're telling me she was with Michael? Your brother-in-law? Yes, I said firmly. She's pregnant by him. A long pause. Then, my father's voice turned cold. That bitch. Then, with complete conviction, Jake, stick to your decision. You're better off without her. Screw that old hag and screw your whore of a wife. I exhaled, my grip on the phone tightening. I'm not going back, Dad. I don't want to deal with them anymore. He agreed. I told him I would bring him to Canada as soon as I could, and that he needed to block Emily's number. I didn't want anything to do with that side of the family ever again. For the next 15 days, I turned off my phone. No calls, no texts, no distractions. I bought a new phone, changed my number, and set all my social media to private. I didn't unfriend Emily or her family. I just hid them. They were dead to me. Then, one day, I got a message from Ethan. You won't believe this, he wrote. Emily showed up at my door, desperate for answers. I felt a twist in my stomach. What did you say? I told her she should have asked you herself instead of screwing her brother-in-law. Then I slammed the door in her face. I let out a bitter laugh. Finally, someone had stood up to her. Ethan said she was a mess. I wasn't surprised. She had destroyed everything. And now, she had to live with it. After 2 weeks, I turned my phone back on. What I saw made my stomach turn. 100+ messages. Most of them from Emily. Jake, please. I still love you. This means nothing. I want to give you your first child. This was for my sister. Don't ignore me. Please answer. I love you. Then there were audio messages. Her voice sounded broken, desperate, but I wasn't moved. I had made my decision. Then came Margaret's messages. They were vicious. You're being selfish, Jake. You could ruin my grandchild's future. Emily has lost so much weight because of the stress. She was hospitalized for a nervous breakdown. I didn't care. I blocked her number immediately. I wasn't falling for their games. And as the days went by, something strange happened. I started to heal. My father finally moved in with me. It was a relief to have him here. He was adjusting well to life in Canada. I found a better job, one that paid well enough to live comfortably. For the first time in years, things were looking up. And then, something I never expected happened. I got permanent residency in Canada. I was free. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up. I hired a good lawyer and filed for divorce. Emily was served within weeks. We included her handwritten note in the petition, a clear admission that she had abandoned the marriage. We also included the WhatsApp messages as evidence. The case was ironclad. Emily kept sending messages, but at this point, they were just white noise. Nothing mattered anymore. Then, months later, I found out something I never expected. Emily had a miscarriage. The child was gone. Margaret blamed me for it, claimed I had caused it by abandoning Emily, making her depressed. But the real kicker? Emily had cut ties with her own family. She blamed them for pressuring her into having a child with Michael. And just like that, the family that destroyed my life had turned on itself. Karma had finally come full circle. And I was finally free. It seemed like she was trying to absolve herself of any responsibility. But I knew better. Despite everything, she kept searching for me, kept trying to reach out. She still thought I'd come back to her. She thought I was weak, but I wasn't going to fall for it again. Then, one day, a video call popped up on my screen. It was Emily. I wasn't sure why I answered. Maybe I wanted to see how far she had fallen. Maybe I wanted to know if there was anything left of the woman I had once loved. But when her face appeared on the screen, I barely recognized her. She looked exhausted, like life had drained every ounce of youth from her. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale, her expression heavy with regret. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The guilt, the consequences of her actions, they had finally caught up to her. She tried to apologize immediately, but I wasn't having it. I kept my camera off, refusing to let her see my face, refusing to give her even a glimpse of my new life. "This will be brief," I said, my voice cold. "I wasn't here to listen. I was here to end this. The sum of your actions defines who you are. You made a choice you knew I wouldn't agree with. You confused my love with obedience, and that's something I will never allow." I let the words hang between us. She didn't speak. "Maybe by now, we would have been expecting a child," I continued. "But patience is a virtue, and you failed to cultivate it." I could hear her breathing, shaky, uneven. "As for your bitch of a mother, Margaret, she's still alive, unfortunately." I let out a low chuckle, full of disdain. "And honestly, I pray that when her time comes, she dies in agony." I heard her sharp inhale, but I didn't stop. "I promise you this, Emily. When she dies, I will come back and piss on her grave." A choked sob escaped her lips. I felt nothing. "You and your mother killed our marriage, and that's something you'll carry on your conscience forever." I paused, let it sink in. Then I finished. "As for me, I've moved on. I've started dating, and soon, I'll leave you in the past where you belong. I will never forget you, Emily, but I will never forgive you." There was silence on the other end. Then, she broke down in tears. I sat there, listening, feeling nothing but detachment. Then, through her sobs, she said something that made me pause. "The doctors, they told me I can't have children anymore. During my surgery, my uterus was removed. I hadn't expected that." For a moment, I just sat there, absorbing the words. This wasn't karma I wished on her. I had never wanted something this brutal to happen, but it wasn't my problem anymore. I didn't say another word. I just ended the call. And that was the last time I ever heard from Emily. That was 2019. I've been living in Montreal since then, recovering, rebuilding, healing from that life, from that woman, from all of it. It hasn't been easy, but it's been necessary. The divorce was finalized. I was free. We had nothing to split. The judge ruled I had to pay alimony for a year, but I didn't care. I was done. Then, in 2020, the world shut down. Days blurred into each other. Everything felt like a fever dream, like a story that wasn't even mine anymore, like fiction, like something that never happened. And honestly, I wish it hadn't. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.